The conference room was filled with people, each of them displaying expressions that ranged from anxiety to determination. I found myself at the center of that heated discussion, surrounded by graphs, charts, and the unmistakable strong smell of coffee that permeated the air. The fluorescent lights illuminated the space in a cold manner, reflecting the tense atmosphere that hung in the air. It was just another ordinary day in my corporate life, where every second was dedicated to work, and every minute lost was a wasted opportunity. The topic at hand was a new acquisition that promised not only to expand our business but also to solidify our position in the market. My words flowed easily, cutting through the air like sharp blades. I presented solid arguments, backed by data that would convince anyone of the proposal's viability. Admiring glances turned toward me, and I absorbed that admiration like fuel feeding my ambition. Yet, even amidst all that fervor, there was a palpable absence of human warmth. I spoke about figures, strategies, and risks, but there was no space for emotions or vulnerabilities. It was as if, in that corporate world, I had built an armor so sturdy that, at some point, I had forgotten how to take it off. When the meeting finally came to an end, a momentary relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of emptiness. People began to leave, discussing the next steps, but I merely observed, lost in thought. The echo of applause still resonated in my mind, but the satisfaction was fleeting. I had achieved yet another professional victory, but what did that mean to me? In that instant, I realized I was further away than ever from something I couldn't quite identify. I returned to my luxurious apartment, a space that perfectly reflected my success, designer furniture, contemporary art on the walls, and a panoramic view of the city that never sleeps. Each shelf was filled with awards and achievements, standing as a testament to the businesswoman I had become. But at the same time, all of it surrounded me like a labyrinth, and the solitude became increasingly evident. The absence of laughter, carefree conversations, or any form of companionship was deafening. I had built a fortress but felt like a prisoner within it. As I gazed out at the city, with its lights flickering like artificial stars, a spontaneous idea sparked in my mind. A visit to the local orphanage. The thought seemed absurd at first, a deviation from my methodical and controlled routine. But for some inexplicable reason, something inside me ignited. What did I expect to find there? A charity project to ease my conscience? Or perhaps just a distraction? Regardless of the reason, the idea began to gain traction in my mind, as if a part of me was crying out for a connection I had long ignored. The next day, I followed my impulse. The orphanage was located in a neighborhood of the city I rarely visited. The atmosphere was different, marked by a slower pace of life, contrasting with the hustle and bustle that surrounded me daily. Upon entering the building, I was greeted by a familiar scent, a mix of disinfectant and the soft aroma of what seemed like homemade food. The walls were adorned with colorful drawings made by children, a testament to the creativity that still thrived there despite the circumstances. The receptionist welcomed me with a smile, and I returned it with a nod, trying to mask my apprehension. I was led to a room where several children were gathered. At first, I felt out of place, as if I were an intruder in a world I had never considered. I looked around, and it was then that my eyes fell on two children in particular, Lucas and Mia. They were sitting together, a bit apart from the others, with expressions that mixed sadness and hope. Lucas, the boy, had dark hair and a penetrating gaze that seemed to capture the essence of all his suffering. Beside him, Mia, a little girl with curly hair and big eyes, appeared to carry the weight of the world on her small shoulders. There was something in the way they looked at each other that touched me deeply. The bond between them was undeniable, and an overwhelming urge surged within me to protect them, to envelop them in a warm embrace that I knew they had probably never experienced. However, I quickly pushed that thought aside. I didn't have time to get involved in lives that were not mine. What could I offer these children? Just a quick visit, an act of charity that wouldn't change their realities. Time seemed to stand still as I watched them. I felt a wave of conflicting emotions stirring within me. On one hand, there was a part of me that wanted to approach them, to offer some form of comfort or affection. But on the other hand, the businesswoman in me reminded me that getting involved meant relinquishing control, giving up the security I had worked so hard to build. I took a deep breath, trying to push away the connection that was starting to form within me. As I prepared to walk away, I realized that something had shifted inside me. The children, even in their sadness, were a reminder that life was about more than achievements and numbers. There was a world of feelings, vulnerabilities, and loves that I had ignored in exchange for success. And at that moment, I understood that perhaps, just perhaps, what I needed was not just another project to fill my time, but something that challenged me to break down the barriers I had constructed around myself. I left the orphanage with a knot in my throat and an unease in my heart. The image of Lucas and Mia stayed with me, like an echo that wouldn't fade. What would I do next? This doubt accompanied me, becoming a constant whisper in my mind. The life I had chosen now felt like a gilded prison, and what I truly desired, I still did not know. The day began like any other. The sun rose over the skyscrapers of the city, reflecting light off glass facades that seemed to absorb the vibrant energy of the surroundings. I found myself, once again, in my office, surrounded by documents and charts that represented achievements and goals. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the cold air from the air conditioning, creating an atmosphere that, for some reason, did not bring me the usual comfort. However, something felt different. As we discussed the details of a new acquisition, my assistant's voice echoed in the background, but I could hardly hear him. My thoughts were far away, lost in a remote corner of my mind, where two children, Lucas and Mia, danced like shadows. The sad look I saw in both of them during my visit to the orphanage occupied my mind like a persistent echo, a constant reminder that what I once considered important no longer held the same weight. The hours dragged on, and when I finally managed to free myself from the meeting, the feeling of emptiness was almost palpable. I walked down the hallway towards my office, where the walls were adorned with awards and achievements that, at this point, seemed stranger than ever. The solitude of that space, filled with recognition, enveloped me like a heavy blanket. I sat at my desk but couldn't focus on anything. The glow of the computer screen was overshadowed by the image of two faces that had watched me with a mix of hope and despair. The idea of returning to the orphanage emerged as an almost involuntary impulse. What was I hoping to find there? A momentary escape from reality? An opportunity for redemption? I couldn't say. What I knew was that I needed to see those children again, as if they had become part of a new narrative unfolding in my life, a story that had no room for the success I had always valued. When I arrived at the orphanage, the air felt different. The atmosphere was heavy with an emotional weight I couldn't ignore. The walls, painted in soft colors, seemed to hold secrets and echoes of children's laughter. However, the silence that dominated the space was deafening. The director greeted me with a friendly smile, but his gaze betrayed a concern that I couldn't overlook. He was aware of the fragile situation of Lucas and Mia. I walked through the rooms with my heart racing, each step bringing me closer to the reality I feared. When I finally found them, they were sitting on the floor, playing with some worn-out toys. Lucas, with his messy hair and big eyes, looked at me with a mix of expectation and doubt. Mia, smaller and more reserved, watched closely, as if trying to gauge the depth of my presence. The instant connection I had felt the first time intensified, but at the same time, a wave of despair washed over me. The director informed me that Lucas and Mia were about to be relocated to an institution that, according to him, wouldn't provide the care and love they deserved. Those words sounded like a blow, a cruel truth that settled in my heart. I couldn't allow that to happen. The thought of those children, who somehow had already found a place in my life, being separated and taken to a place devoid of human warmth terrified me. At that moment, I made a decision. The emotions I had tried to bury began to surface, and I felt an intense desire to protect them. Suddenly, everything I had built, all my achievements, seemed insignificant in the face of the reality those children confronted. I wanted to be a safe harbor for them, a place where they could feel love and hope. But how? How could I, a woman who had always prioritized work and success, transform into someone capable of being a mother? I spoke with the director, seeking a way to intervene in the situation. He explained that there was a complex legal process and that, to adopt, I would need to demonstrate emotional and financial stability. But how could I prove that when my life had always revolved around numbers and goals? The idea of opening myself up to a world I had kept at arm's length terrified me. As we spoke, I noticed my assistant, who had accompanied me on the visit, watching me with an expression of concern. He had always been someone who supported me, but I had never seen him so alarmed. What did he see in me? A lost woman, or someone finally beginning to understand what truly mattered? That struggle was not just for the children, it was also an internal battle, a confrontation with the person I was and the one I was becoming. With renewed determination, I left the orphanage feeling a weight on my shoulders, but also a flame ignited within me. Each step toward my car was a reminder that I was ready to fight. I didn't know exactly how, but I was willing to do whatever it took to prevent Lucas and Mia from being taken away. I couldn't live with myself if that happened. In the following days, the idea of creating a plan began to take shape in my mind. I needed to understand the system, the laws surrounding adoption, and, above all, what would be necessary to demonstrate that I could be the mother those children deserved. The fight wouldn't be easy, but there was something within me that, while still hesitant, felt alive for the first time. With each visit to the orphanage, I felt more connected to Lucas and Mia. With every smile they offered me, a new layer of my coldness melted away. I knew I needed to be strong, not just for them, but for myself. I was beginning to realize that life was more than material accomplishments, there was something deeper and more meaningful waiting for me. When I returned to the office, the work routine felt even more oppressive. I was in a sea of numbers, but my mind was far away, immersed in plans and strategies. What had once been just a job was now becoming a blank canvas on which I wanted to paint a new life, a life that included Lucas and Mia. The idea of being a mother, although terrifying, began to transform into something I longed for. The struggle was just beginning, and I was determined not to give up. Through every challenge, every obstacle, I would remember the faces of Lucas and Mia and the hope that lit up their eyes. It was time to act, time to fight for a future that suddenly seemed more promising than any achievement I had accomplished until then. I arrived at the orphanage again, nervous but determined. The morning sun filtered through the windows, illuminating the worn walls and blending the scent of cleanliness with the sweet aroma of the new toys I had brought. Each visit became a new opportunity to connect with Lucas and Mia, yet at the same time, a constant reminder that I was intruding on a space that, until then, had been entirely theirs. The children, with their distinct personalities, began to open up a little more each day. Lucas was the more reserved one. His sadness seemed deeper, like a dark lake hiding secrets. Yet, when I saw him playing with the new toy cars I brought, his expression changed. He smiled in a way that filled me with warmth, a feeling I didn't quite know. Mia, on the other hand, was a burst of energy. Her eyes sparkled with an insatiable curiosity, and her laughter echoed through the halls of the orphanage like music. I loved watching her play, her laughter was like a balm for my soul, so accustomed to a life filled with business and numbers. With each visit, I brought something new, books, clothes, toys. It was an attempt to create a bond, to show them that I was there, that I cared. However, the more involved I became, the more I realized the barrier that stood between us. I was a stranger in a world they knew all too well, and the idea that I could be a maternal figure felt so distant and unreal. I looked at them and thought about the pain they carried, the rejections they had faced. With every smile they offered me, I felt more guilty for not being able to give them what they truly needed, a home, a family. One afternoon, while organizing some clothes in a corner of the dining hall, I heard giggles coming from the courtyard. I walked to the door and saw Lucas and Mia playing hide and seek. My heart tightened as I observed their joy. It was such a simple moment, yet so full of life. Lucas hid behind a tree, and Mia counted aloud, the anticipation written all over her face. When she found him, their laughter erupted, and for a brief moment, the walls of the orphanage seemed to disappear, revealing a world where only the three of us existed. Yet, the lightness of these moments was often overshadowed by a shadow that hung over us. There were conversations I couldn't avoid, especially those that arose after the visit from the institution's lawyer. With each meeting, more information emerged about Lucas and Mia's past, revealing a complicated family history filled with challenges. I listened in silence, absorbing the weight of the words that left me feeling powerless. The children were not just orphans, they were victims of a system that failed to protect them, often leaving them at the mercy of their own demons. In one of those meetings, the lawyer's words echoed in my mind like a distant, agonizing echo. He spoke about the difficulties of adoption, how the children's family history complicated the situation even further. As he spoke, I felt a knot in my throat, a mix of frustration and sadness. I wanted to scream, I wanted to fight against this system that seemed so indifferent to the suffering of two children who only desired love and security. I wasn't a mother, I didn't have the necessary experience, but my heart pulsed with a desire to protect them, to give them what they had never had. After that meeting, I returned home feeling an immense weight pressing down on me. The silence of my apartment echoed around me, filled only by the sound of the wind rustling against the windows. I looked around at the awards and achievements that adorned the walls. What did all of these accomplishments mean if I couldn't save two innocent lives? This thought tormented me, and I found myself lost in a sea of doubts and concerns. That night, while trying to distract myself with work, something caught my attention. A notebook I had seen in Lucas's backpack during one of my visits. It was a diary, and the idea of opening it left me conflicted. Invading a child's privacy was not something I wanted to do, but the curiosity and the need to understand what he was feeling were stronger. I sat on my couch, hesitant, but the desire to learn more about Lucas and his feelings drove me to open the diary. The pages were filled with childish scribbles and drawings, but the words reflected a depth I hadn't expected. He wrote about his dreams of having a house with a garden where he could run freely. He described his fears of being rejected again, of never finding a home that would accept him. With every word, my heart broke. It was a world of hopes and disappointments, and I could not hold back the tears that streamed down my face. Reading it made me question my life, my priorities. I had been so focused on my career, on material achievements, that I had neglected what truly mattered. Motherhood was something I had never considered, but reading Lucas's diary made me realize that love does not limit itself to blood ties. Love can be built, nurtured, and perhaps, just perhaps, I could be the person who would offer him and Mia the safety and affection they so desperately craved. I closed the diary, feeling a whirlwind of emotions. It was as if I had discovered a new part of myself, something I hadn't known existed. A desire to fight, to become not just a visitor in their lives, but a constant presence, a figure of support and love. I didn't know how, but I was determined to find a way for Lucas and Mia to have the home they deserved. The decision began to take shape in my mind, I needed to act. It was no longer just a matter of compassion, it was a matter of responsibility and choice. Above all, it was a matter of love. I could no longer hide behind the cold walls of my corporate world, I needed to open myself up to this new reality, to this new possibility. The journey was just beginning, and I was willing to do whatever it took for Lucas and Mia to have a better future. When I decided that I would do everything within my power to help Lucas and Mia, a wave of determination surged through my body. I knew the fight would be tough, but the thought of seeing them separated was unbearable. The meeting with the social worker was a crucial step. He explained the legal adoption process and the steps I would need to take. I listened to his words, but at the same time, my mind was absorbed in the image of Lucas and Mia, smiling, playing, and dreaming. They did not deserve to be just another number in a failed system. In the following days, I immersed myself in a frantic research about adoption. The time I used to dedicate to meetings and business was now consumed by paperwork, documents, and information about the legislation. I was determined to understand every aspect of this process, every nuance that could help me build a solid argument. With each piece of information I absorbed, a new layer of hope formed within me. I needed to prepare myself, not only for the bureaucracy but for the resistance that would come. The hearing was scheduled, and the air was thick with anticipation. When I arrived at the courthouse, the smell of the place was a mix of formality and despair. The walls were adorned with portraits of judges who once decided fates, and I wondered if they felt the weight of the lives that were in their hands. I sat in the waiting room, nervous, observing the other people around me. Some were there in search of justice, while others, like me, simply wished for a better future for those they loved. When I entered the courtroom, the atmosphere was austere. The judge, in his robe with an impassive expression, seemed like a monument to authority, making me feel small in his presence. My eyes locked onto Lucas and Mia, sitting in a corner, holding hands. Their faces wore a mix of hope and fear. Seeing them made my heart ache. They were the reason I was there, and I needed to be strong for them. The institution's lawyer began to question my ability to be a mother. Each word felt like a blow. He spoke about my work life, my priorities, and what I could offer to two children who had already faced so much. His voice echoed in the room, but I was so focused on Lucas and Mia that I could barely hear him. I needed to defend myself, I needed to show that I was more than just a cold, calculating businesswoman. I was a woman who had learned what it truly meant to love. Taking a deep breath, in a moment of clarity, I recalled all the afternoons I spent with Lucas and Mia at the orphanage. Every laugh, every moment of connection, every exchanged glance. What I felt for them wasn't just a whim, it was a genuine bond, something I had never experienced before. I stood up and, with a firm voice, began to speak. I talked about how my visits to the orphanage had transformed me, about how I was committed to being present in their lives, to being a mother who wouldn't abandon them. The lawyer looked at me with disdain, but I refused to be discouraged. As I spoke, Lucas and Mia exchanged a meaningful look. It was as if, in that moment, the three of us were connected by an invisible thread. I wanted them in my life, and that was all that mattered. The lawyer continued to question me, but I was determined. I spoke about the plans I had for the future, about how I could offer them a home full of love and security. With each word, I felt the barriers that had been erected around me begin to break down. I was more than a stereotype, I was capable of love. The hearing went on, and the lawyer's words became a distant hum. What mattered was the expression on Lucas and Mia's faces. They were my anchor, my focus, the light amid the darkness that threatened to consume me. The judge seemed to listen attentively, but the internal battle I was facing was much greater than any decision he could make. It was a fight for love, for a future I had never thought I would desire. When the lawyer finally ceased his questioning, I felt a momentary relief. But the tension still lingered in the air. The judge asked a few questions, and I answered sincerely. He seemed to ponder, and I waited, my heart racing. Time felt like it was dragging. I looked at Lucas and Mia, whose eyes were now shining with expectation. In that instant, I promised myself that I wouldn't give up on them. The hearing concluded, and I left the room with my mind full of confusing thoughts. What would happen now? I knew I had given my all, but the future was still uncertain. As I exited, my mind was in turmoil. All I wanted was to scoop Lucas and Mia into my arms and tell them that everything would be all right. But instead, I saw them sitting, waiting for a decision that would change their lives. Their expressions mirrored my own, hope mixed with fear. I wanted to run to them, hug them, and promise that I wouldn't give up. But the reality was that there was still a battle to be fought. And in that moment, I knew that the true struggle was just beginning. The determination that surged within me was palpable, and I was ready to face whatever came my way. I wouldn't give up on Lucas and Mia. They were my new reason to live, and I was willing to do whatever it took to keep them together and safe. The sunlight streamed through the windows of my luxurious apartment, reflecting in every corner as if it wanted to remind me that, despite the shine of my accomplishments, there was something dark and absent in my life. The phone rang with a work appointment notification, but instead of answering, I let it ring. My thoughts were elsewhere, in a world I hadn't planned, yet somehow irresistibly attracted me, Lucas and Mia. Their faces were still fresh in my memory, and I found myself smiling involuntarily as I recalled the moments we shared at the orphanage. Over the days, my work routine began to blend with visits to the orphanage. With each visit, it felt as if a new aspect of my life was being revealed, a facet I had always ignored. The children were like a breath of fresh air in my monotonous existence. Mia's laughter, with her innocent way of seeing the world, and Lucas's seriousness, which carried a maturity beyond his years, started to transform me. I found myself dedicating fewer hours in the boardroom and more in simple moments with them, like playing ball in the yard or helping Mia assemble a puzzle. The warmth emanating from their laughter and play became fuel for my soul. The walls of my previously rigid life began to crumble, revealing a space where I could feel, where I could love. With each visit, I felt myself getting closer to them. A sense of protection blossomed in my chest, an uncontrollable urge to ensure they would never again experience rejection or loneliness. What had once been merely an impulse of compassion now transformed into a deep and genuine commitment. One day, while watching Lucas trying to teach Mia to ride a bike, I realized how emotionally invested I had become. Lucas, with his protective nature, always making sure his sister wouldn't fall. The scene was so simple, but the emotion it stirred in me was overwhelming. I had never imagined I could feel so much for children who were not mine. What was forming in my heart was something I had never acknowledged before, a capacity to love that I had kept locked away for far too long. One afternoon, after a particularly tiring day, I was surprised by an old friend. Pedro, a colleague I hadn't seen in years, appeared out of nowhere at the orphanage. He was also there to help as a volunteer. The conversation flowed naturally, and soon we were reminiscing about old times. He noticed how different I was, lighter, and that intrigued me. His gaze, filled with affection and understanding, made me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. He mentioned that he always knew I had incredible potential to be a loving mother, even when I doubted it myself. His words echoed in my mind like a gentle melody resonating in my spirit. That night, on my way home, I couldn't stop thinking about what Pedro had said. The potential to be a mother felt so distant, so unimaginable, but suddenly it seemed tangible. I wondered if this was what I truly wanted. The idea of building a family, of caring for and loving someone in a way I had never done before, was tempting. But what if I failed? What if I couldn't provide Lucas and Mia with the home they deserved? Those doubts plagued me, but at the same time, a new determination began to grow within me. I needed to fight for them, not just as an authority figure, but as someone who truly cared, someone who could be a mother. What once seemed like a whim transformed into a mission. However, what I didn't expect was that a new challenge was on the horizon. During one of my subsequent visits to the orphanage, while talking to the social worker, I overheard murmurs about a distant family member of Lucas and Mia who was coming forward. The news hit me like a bucket of cold water. I wasn't prepared for this. The thought that someone else could claim them, taking them away from me, left me in shock. My heart raced, and a wave of despair washed over me. I couldn't let this happen. The reality that I was in a race against time began to settle in my mind. I needed to act quickly. The feeling of helplessness overwhelmed me, but at the same time, a flame of determination ignited. If I truly wanted to be the mother that Lucas and Mia needed, I would have to fight with all my strength. I started to devise a plan, researching everything I could about the legal situation, seeking to understand the implications and what would be necessary to keep the children with me. Time felt scarce, and I knew every second counted. Meetings with lawyers and social workers became part of my routine, and although the stress consumed me, the idea of losing Lucas and Mia propelled me forward, urging me not to give up. They meant everything to me now. The life I had envisioned, filled with success and material achievements, lost its luster in the face of the possibility of losing the chance to be a mother. The visits to the orphanage grew increasingly charged with emotion. Lucas and Mia sensed the tension in the air, but I tried to maintain my composure. Inside, I was in a storm, but when I looked at them, I saw the reason I couldn't give up. They needed me, someone who believed in them and was willing to fight. And that was exactly what I intended to do. The nights were long, filled with insomnia and anxiety, as I reviewed papers, listened to accounts from others who had gone through similar situations, and prepared my case. The idea of presenting arguments in a legal hearing terrified me, but the urgency to protect Lucas and Mia gave me the courage I needed. I knew I wasn't alone in this fight. My determination was fueled by the love that was growing inside me, a love I never thought I had the capacity to feel. With each passing day, my mind filled with plans and strategies. I dreamed of the day I could finally look into Lucas and Mia's eyes and tell them they were safe, that they could count on me, that I was willing to be the mother they deserved. This vision became my guiding star, propelling me forward even when the shadows of doubt and fear threatened to engulf me. And so, between light and darkness, between doubt and determination, the battle for the custody of Lucas and Mia became the reason for my existence. What started as a casual encounter in an orphanage transformed into a fight for the family I never knew I wanted. I was ready to face whatever came my way, for them, for us. The decision to fight for Lucas and Mia pulsed within me like an incessant drum. Ever since those children entered my life, something had changed drastically. It was as if I was awakening from a long slumber, and the reality that once surrounded me, filled with business and achievements, now seemed superficial, empty. I gathered friends and family, people who had always been by my side but had not yet seen the depth of my transformation. I needed support, not just emotionally but also practically, and I knew they could help me build a solid case to adopt Lucas and Mia. With my heart racing, I organized a meeting at my home. The environment, usually neat and sober, was filled with a different energy. Voices mingled in an excited murmur as I guided them through everything I had discovered about the children. I shared their stories, their fears, and most importantly, the love that had begun to blossom within me. What once was a life dedicated to work now found new purpose, giving Lucas and Mia the family they so desperately desired. The people around me proved more receptive than I had imagined. My friends, with their life experiences, offered valuable advice and shared their own stories of struggle and love. The energy in the room was contagious. Hope began to rise among us like a flame lit on a cloudy day. I started to see that I wasn't alone in this battle. I had a support network ready to help me face the challenges ahead. With everyone's support, I dedicated the following weeks to gathering documents, testimonies, and references that could strengthen my position during the final hearing. Every step I took in that direction seemed to connect me even more to Lucas and Mia. I envisioned myself as the mother they needed, not just an authority figure, but a source of love and security. The moments I spent with them, even if brief, became the most precious of my life. I saw them smile, and that was enough to fill me with courage. The day of the hearing finally arrived. The courtroom was thick with tension, and the air felt heavy with the emotions involved. I sat in the front row, my heart racing wildly. When the judge entered and took his seat, the room fell silent. I felt my life was about to change again, and the anticipation was almost unbearable. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for Lucas and Mia, for a future that could be more radiant than any I had ever lived. The hearing began, and the institution's lawyer presented their case. He spoke about the family history of Lucas and Mia, the challenges they faced, and the reasons they had been rejected by other families. Each word he uttered cut through me like a knife. I knew the children were more than their pasts, they were warriors, and I was determined to prove it. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and stood up. The words I had rehearsed 1,000 times in front of the mirror flowed naturally. I spoke about what Lucas and Mia meant to me, about the connection we had built, and about my desire to be the mother they deserved. Hearing my own voice, I realized there was a strength within me that I had never recognized before. I was no longer the cold, distant woman who prioritized work over human relationships. Now, I had a purpose and a passion that consumed every part of my being. The energy in the courtroom shifted as I began to speak. I could feel the eyes of those present on me, and instead of feeling intimidated, I was overwhelmed by a wave of determination. The hearing stretched on, and arguments were exchanged. I listened to the attorney representing a distant family member who wanted custody of the children. A sense of despair settled in me when he presented his credentials and the security he could offer Lucas and Mia. But, in an unexpected moment, the attorney presented a document that would change everything. It was a psychological evaluation showing that the claimant was emotionally unfit to care for children. The murmurs in the room intensified, and hope began to resonate in the atmosphere. I didn't know what to do with that information. The weight I carried seemed to dissipate, and for a brief moment, I saw a light at the end of the tunnel. The idea that I could actually be the mother Lucas and Mia needed began to take shape. The judge, with a serious look, examined the documentation, and the silence in the room was palpable. Every second felt like an eternity as everyone awaited his decision. Finally, the judge turned to me. His words echoed in the room and deep within my soul. After considering all the arguments presented, I have decided that custody of Lucas and Mia will be granted to Vanessa. What followed was a whirlwind of emotions. I couldn't hold back the tears. Joy and relief blended together in a warm embrace that felt like a blanket wrapping around me. When the children entered the room, I pulled them close, enveloping them in a tight hug. Lucas and Mia were free to stay with me, and I could finally give them the home they had always dreamed of. In the days that followed, life began to transform in ways I had never imagined. The house that once felt like a cave of solitude now echoed with laughter and play. Lucas and Mia became a part of me. The park we used to visit became our refuge, a place where we could have fun and connect. Every smile, every laugh, every shared moment became a precious memory. I watched them run, play, and explore the world around us, and the feeling of happiness I experienced was indescribable. That day at the park, with the sun shining, was one of the most memorable. As I watched Lucas and Mia play, a wave of love washed over me. The coldness that once resided in my heart had transformed into a blazing flame. I hadn't just found a purpose, I had found a new family. And in that moment, I realized that the love that had blossomed where loneliness once resided was all I needed to feel complete.